Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're not stepping into a battlefield, a throne room, or a moment of loud conquest. Tonight, we're entering something far quieter and far more powerful. We're stepping into kitchens lit by oil lamps, grain rooms where cats once lingered in silence, open steppes where horses were cared for like second bodies, courtyards where boys learned loyalty before they ever learned war, and banquet halls where empires were held together not by weapons, but by ritual, memory, and trust. This is the story of how humans learned to build power without force, how cats chose us twice, how horses taught responsibility, how brotherhood was trained in youth, and how shared meals decided who truly belonged. This is not a story about domination. It's a story about patience, care, and the invisible systems that allowed civilizations to endure long after the noise of battle faded. So, before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes, let your breathing slow, allow the world to soften at the edges, and drift with me into a quiet history where power whispers, rituals linger, and rest comes naturally.
Tonight, we are not entering a palace or a battlefield or a hall of kings whose names echo loudly through history. Tonight, we are stepping into something far quieter and far more intimate. A small kitchen at the edge of an early farming settlement, where the air smells faintly of grain and dust, where clay jars line the walls, filled carefully with harvested wheat and barley, each kernel representing weeks of labor and hope. And in this quiet room, lit by a low, trembling flame, something subtle is about to happen, something history rarely announces, because power does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives on soft paws, in the shape of a small animal that was never truly owned, never commanded, never trained to obey, and yet chose to stay. This is where the story of the domestication of cats truly begins, not as an act of domination, but as a quiet agreement. And to understand it, we must first let go of the idea that humans always controlled the natural world, because for most of our early history, we did not. When agriculture first took root in the Fertile Crescent, when humans began storing surplus grain instead of wandering endlessly, they unknowingly created something new, an environment rich with opportunity. Grain attracted mice. Mice multiplied quickly in warm storage spaces, and where mice gathered, wildcats followed, not because humans invited them, but because nature responded efficiently to abundance. These early cats were not pets. They were cautious hunters, slipping through shadows, watching from a distance, evaluating risk. And humans, busy with their harvests and fragile food supplies, noticed something equally important. Wherever cats lingered, mice disappeared. And for the first time, a relationship formed without commands or chains. Humans did not capture cats and force them to stay. They simply tolerated their presence. They did not interfere. They did not punish. They allowed the cats to do what cats had always done: hunt. And in return, their grain stores survived. This was not domestication as we usually imagine it. There were no breeding programs, no deliberate selection, no collars or names whispered by the fire. Instead, there was proximity, repetition, and mutual benefit. Over generations, cats that were less fearful, slightly calmer around humans, found better hunting grounds and safer shelter, while humans who accepted these silent hunters found their food protected. And slowly, without intention, bodies changed, behaviors softened, and a new balance emerged. This is why historians and archaeologists speak of cats being domesticated not once, but twice. Because unlike dogs, who were actively shaped by human desire, cats shaped themselves alongside us. And this first domestication was not a conquest, it was a coexistence, a lesson in restraint, a moment when humans discovered that the most effective form of power was sometimes to step back and allow nature to align itself. And this quiet lesson would echo much later across civilizations, long after clay jars turned into stone granaries and villages into cities. Because once again, thousands of years later, cats would repeat this pattern, spreading across the Mediterranean, into ancient Egypt where they slipped into temples and homes alike, not as servants, but as respected companions, symbols of protection and balance, worshipped not because they were controlled, but because they remained independent. And tonight, as we sit quietly with this image, a small cat watching a room from the edge of the light, we begin to see the deeper truth beneath the history for sleep, that the first power humans truly mastered was not force, not command, but the ability to create conditions, to build environments where cooperation could emerge naturally. And as your breathing slows and the mind begins to soften, remember that history is not only written by those who conquered loudly, but also by those who learned, patiently, when not to control. As the nights grew quieter around these early settlements, something else began to change. Not in the fields or the grain jars, but inside the human mind itself. Because living beside cats required a new kind of awareness, one that was slower, more observant, and far less demanding. Unlike dogs who looked to humans for direction, cats offered no such reassurance. They did not wait for instructions. They did not seek approval. They appeared when it suited them and vanished just as easily. And yet, over time, humans adjusted. They learned to read subtler signs, a flick of a tail, a pause in movement, the quiet presence of a hunter resting near the warmth of stored grain. And in doing so, humans practiced something rare in early history: patience without expectation. This shift matters more than it seems, because early agricultural life was fragile. A single season of lost grain could mean hunger or death, and the presence of cats created not only protection, but calm, the quiet knowledge that something unseen was keeping watch. And as generations passed, this calm presence softened human spaces. Fires burned longer into the night. Storage rooms became places of routine rather than anxiety. And children grew up seeing cats not as wild threats, but as familiar shapes slipping between light and shadow. Archaeologists later found evidence of this deepening bond in unexpected places, such as a grave in ancient Cyprus, where a human was buried alongside a cat nearly 9,000 years ago. A choice that reveals something profound, because burial reflects meaning, memory, and emotional connection. It tells us that by this point, cats were no longer simply tolerated. They were acknowledged, remembered, and quietly valued. Yet even then, they were not owned in the strict sense. There were no leashes, no pens, no enforced breeding. Instead, cats retained their independence, choosing human proximity without surrendering their nature. And this balance is precisely why historians speak of cats as self-domesticated, a rare case in which an animal adapted to human society largely on its own terms, selecting environments that suited its instincts while gently shaping human behavior in return. This is the first domestication, slow, unintentional, and rooted in shared benefit. But history, as it often does, repeated itself in a different form. Because thousands of years later, as trade routes expanded and civilizations rose along rivers and seas, cats once again found opportunities created by human activity. Ships carrying grain attracted rodents. Ports became new hunting grounds, and cats followed, spreading across continents, slipping into new cultures, languages, and belief systems. And it was in ancient Egypt that this second domestication took on a new tone. Here, cats were no longer merely useful, they were symbolic, linked to protection, fertility, and balance. Killing a cat became a serious crime, and families mourned their deaths with ritual care. Yet even in Egypt, cats were never fully stripped of their independence. Temple cats wandered freely, household cats came and went, and reverence did not erase autonomy. This is the second domestication, not biological but cultural, a moment when humans attempted to formalize a relationship that had always resisted control. And this tension between admiration and restraint tells us something essential about power. Because true power, as this history gently suggests, is not about forcing loyalty, but about creating a respect that allows freedom to remain intact. And as you rest with this idea, letting the rhythm of these ancient moments settle into the mind, notice how different this story feels from the usual tales of conquest. There is no hero claiming victory, no command issued, no boundary drawn. Instead, there is only proximity, repetition, and quiet understanding. And perhaps that is why cats still resonate so deeply with us today, because they remind us of an older lesson learned at the edge of firelight, that some relationships thrive precisely because they are not tightly held. And as your thoughts slow and drift, you may sense that this gentle history is not only about cats at all, but about a softer form of strength that humans once understood instinctively long before they tried to name it.
By the time this quiet companionship had settled into daily life, something subtle but lasting had already taken root. A change so gradual that no one living through it would have thought to record it, because history rarely pauses to notice what feels ordinary. And yet it is precisely here, in the ordinary rhythm of shared space, that the deeper meaning of domestication reveals itself. Cats did not simply protect grain or reduce pests, they altered the emotional landscape of early human settlements. They introduced a form of presence that was calm, observant, and unintrusive. And for people whose lives were shaped by uncertainty, weather, seasons, and fragile harvests, this presence mattered more than practicality alone. A cat resting near a doorway, half awake, half alert, signaled that the world was being watched, not anxiously, not aggressively, but attentively. And over time, humans began to mirror this posture. They learned to wait, to observe, to respond rather than react. And this internal shift, though invisible, was profound, because it represented a move away from constant vigilance and toward selective attention, a skill that would later underpin complex societies, governance, and even philosophy. But long before those abstract ideas emerged, it was practiced quietly beside hearths and storage rooms. This is why the domestication of cats is often misunderstood when compared to other animals, because there was no clear moment of control, no single decision where humans declared ownership. Instead, there was a long period of tolerance that gradually turned into familiarity, and familiarity into quiet trust. Cats that were overly aggressive or fearful simply left. Those that adapted stayed. And humans, in turn, adjusted their behavior to avoid startling or provoking these hunters, creating spaces that felt stable and predictable.
This mutual shaping occurred without intention, guided not by ideology, but by daily experience. And this is where the idea of domestication becomes less about animals and more about humans. Because to live with cats required learning boundaries, understanding limits, and accepting that not everything could be commanded. And this lesson echoed forward even as societies grew larger and more complex. When cats traveled with humans aboard ships, curled among ropes and cargo, they carried this same quiet dynamic with them. On long sea journeys, cats were not trained performers or disciplined tools. They were simply present, controlling rodents and offering companionship without demand. Sailors learned to respect their rhythms, to allow them freedom of movement, and in return, ships remained safer, supplies intact, and morale subtly lifted. And as centuries passed, this pattern repeated again and again. Cats thrived in human environments precisely because those environments allowed flexibility, spaces where autonomy was tolerated rather than crushed. And in this sense, cats became living reminders of an alternative path, one where coexistence did not require hierarchy, where benefit flowed both ways without formal contracts or enforcement. And as you sit with this idea, letting the story unfold slowly in the mind, it becomes clear that the domestication of cats was never a finished process. It was, and still is, an ongoing negotiation, renewed every time a cat chooses to stay near human warmth without being compelled. And this ongoing choice carries a quiet message that strength does not always need to assert itself to be effective, that influence can emerge from presence alone, and that some of the most durable relationships in human history were built not through control, but through restraint. And as your breathing deepens and thoughts begin to soften, you may notice how this ancient lesson still feels relevant even now, because in a world often defined by noise and command, the enduring companionship of cats reminds us that calm attention, patience, and respect for independence can shape outcomes just as powerfully as force ever could.
As this long, quiet relationship continued to unfold across centuries, it began to settle into something deeper than usefulness or habit. It became part of the emotional architecture of human life, woven so gently into daily routines that its influence was rarely questioned. Cats were there at the margins of human activity, never demanding attention, yet always present, watching doorways, warming themselves near sleeping children, pacing rooftops at dawn. And in these small, repeated moments, humans absorbed another subtle lesson, one about coexistence without possession. Because unlike fields, tools, or even livestock, cats could not be fully claimed. They crossed boundaries freely, moving between households, between wild spaces and human rooms, reminding people again and again that not everything valuable needs to be enclosed. And this quiet truth reshaped how humans thought about companionship itself. Affection without ownership, trust without enforcement, a pattern that would later echo in philosophy, art, and even spiritual thought, though no one at the time would have named it as such. And as societies grew more complex, filled with laws, hierarchies, and structures of command, the presence of cats remained curiously unchanged. They lived alongside emperors and farmers alike, in palaces and alleyways, untouched by rank, offering the same calm distance everywhere they went. And this consistency mattered because it offered a contrast to the increasingly rigid systems humans were building for themselves.
a reminder that not all order must be imposed from above. Some order emerges naturally when space is allowed. And this may be why the story of cats continues to feel strangely modern even thousands of years later, because it challenges a deeply ingrained assumption that control is the foundation of stability. Yet here was a living example of stability built on tolerance, repetition, and mutual benefit. And even today, when a cat chooses a windowsill, ignores a call, or curls up beside a human without instruction, it reenacts this ancient pattern, a silent affirmation of a relationship that survives precisely because it resists domination. And as you reflect on this, letting the weight of history soften into something closer to a feeling than a fact, it becomes clear that the domestication of cats was never about changing cats into something else. It was about humans changing their expectations, learning to live alongside another being without demanding submission. And this adjustment, slow and almost invisible, represents one of the earliest moments when humans practiced a form of power that was not loud, not forceful, but sustainable. And as the mind begins to drift, it may feel comforting to realize that some of the oldest bonds in human history were formed not through conquest or command, but through quiet choice, repeated across generations. A reminder that even in a restless world, there are relationships that endure simply because they are allowed to be what they are.
And so, as this chapter gently comes to rest, the story of how humans domesticated cats, not once, but twice, reveals itself not as a tale of mastery, but as a quiet mirror held up to human nature itself, because what endured was not a system of control, but a pattern of choice repeated calmly across time. Generation after generation, cats stayed because conditions suited them. Humans adapted because the relationship worked. And in that mutual adjustment, something rare took shape. A bond without submission, a partnership without command. And this is why the domestication of cats feels less like an event and more like a rhythm, a slow, ongoing agreement renewed each day, each night, each moment a cat crosses the threshold between the wild and the human-made world, choosing warmth, choosing safety, choosing proximity without obligation. And for early humans, living alongside this choice subtly reshaped how they understood influence itself, because here was a living reminder that stability could emerge without domination, that order could arise without strict hierarchy, and that patience often produced better outcomes than force. Lessons that would later be forgotten and rediscovered many times throughout history, but first learned here, in silence, beside grain stores and hearth fires. And as you let this realization settle, notice how naturally it aligns with the pace of sleep, because sleep itself cannot be commanded. It arrives only when conditions are right, when noise softens, when tension loosens, when the mind feels safe enough to let go. And in this way, the story of cats becomes a metaphor for rest, for trust, for the gentle power of allowing rather than forcing. And perhaps this is why cats remain such fitting companions in moments of quiet, why they appear in windows at dusk, on beds at night, in libraries and studios, present but undemanding, mirroring the same balance they offered thousands of years ago. And as this chapter closes, carrying us forward toward the next stories in our journey, from animals who chose to live beside humans to animals humans depended upon for movement and survival, remember that the foundation of everything that follows is this simple, ancient insight that the first power humans truly mastered was not how to control another being, but how to shape an environment where cooperation could arise naturally. And as your breathing grows slow and even, and the mind drifts closer to rest, allow this thought to linger softly, like a cat settling into a familiar place, unhurried, unforced, content to stay. And with that calm presence, we gently prepare to move onward, carrying the quiet lessons of coexistence with us into the deeper currents of history that await.
If cats taught early humans patience, horses taught them something heavier and more demanding: responsibility. Because a cat could come and go, but a horse could not survive neglect. And on the wide Mongolian steppe, where the land stretches endlessly and the horizon feels closer than shelter, this lesson shaped an entire civilization. Here, a horse was never simply an animal. It was a second body, an extension of breath, muscle, and movement. From the moment a Mongol child could walk steadily, they learned to read horses the way others read weather or time. The sound of hooves on frozen ground, the shift of weight beneath a saddle, the quiet signals of fatigue or thirst. And this awareness was not learned from books or commands, but from daily life, repeated endlessly. Because survival on the steppe depended not on walls or cities, but on mobility. And mobility depended entirely on the health of horses. Yet what is often misunderstood about the Mongol Empire is that its power did not begin with conquest, it began with care. Long before armies moved, long before banners rose, families tended herds. Mares were milked at dawn and dusk, foals were protected from harsh winds, injured animals were rested rather than forced, and this rhythm of attention formed the invisible foundation of everything that followed. A Mongol warrior did not ride one horse into battle. He rode many, rotating them carefully, knowing exactly when to rest one and mount another. And this knowledge came not from warfare, but from years of intimate care. Because a horse pushed beyond its limits was not heroic, it was lost. And loss on the steppe was unforgiving. There were no replacements waiting behind stable doors. Every animal mattered. Every relationship counted. And in this way, Mongol horse culture cultivated a mindset that was deeply stoic, though never named as such. Patience, discipline, and acceptance of limits were not philosophies, they were necessities. A horse required water before speed, grass before glory, rest before endurance, and this order could not be reversed. And so, Mongol life moved to the rhythm of care. Camps shifted with grazing cycles, routes followed seasonal patterns, and decisions were shaped not by ambition alone, but by what horses could sustain. This is why the Mongol Empire expanded with such efficiency, not because it ignored limits, but because it respected them. Power was built slowly, through repetition, through attention paid every day, not only in moments of battle. And when outsiders later saw Mongol armies appear suddenly across vast distances, it seemed like unstoppable force, but what they were witnessing was the accumulated result of countless quiet mornings spent tending animals, repairing tack, sharing water, and observing signs of strain. And as you rest with this image, a wide steppe under a pale sky, a herd moving calmly as one, it becomes clear that this chapter of history is not truly about war. It is about stewardship, about the discipline required to maintain strength over time. And this lesson, learned through horses,
marks a profound shift from the first chapter, because where cats taught humans when not to interfere, horses taught them when care was non-negotiable. And as your breathing slows and the mind eases into the rhythm of this landscape, remember that the greatest empires are rarely built in moments of excitement. They are built in the quiet consistency of daily responsibility, repeated again and again until strength becomes sustainable.
As Mongol life continued to unfold across the open steppe, responsibility deepened into something more intimate, a form of attentiveness that shaped not only how horses were treated, but how people understood time itself. Because on the steppe, time was not measured by clocks or calendars. It was measured by bodies, by the strength of a horse's legs, by the condition of its hide, by the way it breathed after a long ride. And this sensitivity created a culture where nothing could be rushed without consequence. A horse that was pushed too hard today would fail tomorrow, and tomorrow's failure could mean hunger, exposure, or death. So care became a discipline practiced with quiet seriousness. Foals were allowed to grow slowly. Mares were valued not only for riding, but for milk, which sustained families through harsh seasons. And older horses were not discarded, but reassigned to lighter duties, because every animal represented accumulated time and trust. This approach to horse breeding was not about maximizing speed or size. It was about resilience. Mongol horses were smaller than many war horses used in settled civilizations, but they were strong, enduring, and deeply adapted to their environment, able to survive on sparse grass and withstand extreme cold. And this resilience was not accidental. It emerged from generations of selective care, where survival traits were valued over appearance, and the bond between rider and horse reflected this same practicality. Mongol riders did not dominate their horses through force. They communicated through weight, balance, and familiarity, understanding that fear weakened cooperation while trust strengthened it. And this understanding extended beyond individuals to the entire structure of Mongol society. Because when an army moved, it moved at the pace of its animals. Routes were chosen based on grazing potential. Pauses were taken to allow recovery, and logistics were shaped not by abstract strategy alone, but by living needs. Water sources mattered more than roads. Seasons mattered more than borders. And this attention to care created a form of power that outsiders struggled to understand, because it did not rely on fixed infrastructure. It relied on relationships between humans and animals, between families and herds, between movement and rest. And this is why Mongol expansion appeared almost effortless to those who faced it. They saw speed without seeing preparation, endurance without seeing restraint. But beneath every rapid advance lay years of accumulated discipline, a culture trained to think in terms of sustainability rather than spectacle. And this mindset carried a deeply stoic quality: acceptance of hardship without complaint, focus on what could be controlled, care for what made survival possible, and release of what could not be held. A horse might be lost to illness or weather, and when that happened, grief was acknowledged briefly, but life continued, because attachment never outweighed responsibility to the group. And this balance between care and acceptance formed the emotional core of Mongol life. And as you allow this rhythm to settle in the mind, imagine the steady pace of a herd crossing the steppe, not hurried, not delayed, moving with quiet confidence born from mutual dependence. And notice how different this feels from stories of conquest told loudly elsewhere. Here, strength is not announced, it is maintained through daily choices repeated patiently. And as the mind grows calm, it becomes easier to see how this form of care-based power would one day extend beyond animals, shaping how people were organized, trusted, and relied upon, preparing the ground for the human systems of loyalty and discipline that will emerge later in our journey. But for now, rest with the image of horses grazing under an open sky, tended not for glory, but for continuity, because in that quiet continuity, an empire was already taking shape.
Over time, this discipline of care extended far beyond individual animals and quietly reshaped the Mongol understanding of leadership itself. Because on the steppe, authority could never exist without responsibility. A leader who failed to protect the herds, to plan grazing routes, or to ensure water access would not remain a leader for long. Trust was practical before it was emotional, and it was tested daily through outcomes rather than words. If horses weakened, people suffered, and if people suffered, loyalty dissolved. And so Mongol leadership became deeply grounded in attentiveness, not ceremony. The most respected figures were often those who knew when to move and when to wait, when to push forward and when to rest. Decisions were not made in isolation, but in constant dialogue with the land and the animals that sustained life. And this way of thinking trained the Mongols to see power as something fluid rather than fixed. Strength shifted with seasons, weather, and herd condition, and adapting to these changes required humility and acceptance that no plan could override reality for long. This humility is rarely associated with empires, yet it was central to Mongol success because it prevented overextension. Armies did not march blindly into barren regions without grazing. Camps did not linger where water was scarce. Every movement was negotiated with the living world, and this negotiation fostered a mindset that valued preservation over display, endurance over excess. And this mindset also shaped how horses were treated in moments of stress. When storms swept across the steppe, where winters tightened their grip, horses were sheltered as best as possible, fed before people if necessary, because without them, movement would cease entirely. This prioritization reveals something profound, that Mongol society understood dependency without shame. Reliance on animals was not seen as weakness, but as reality, and acknowledging that reality allowed them to act intelligently rather than emotionally. And in this way, care became a strategic asset, not a sentimental one, because every horse represented stored energy, future mobility, and potential survival. And wasting that resource through impatience or pride was unthinkable. And this principle extended into breeding practices as well. Mares were selected not for beauty, but for temperament and endurance. Stallions were valued for reliability rather than aggression, and bloodlines were preserved through observation rather than rigid control, allowing nature to express strength within boundaries shaped by human care. And as generations passed, this balance produced horses that were remarkably consistent in behavior and resilience. Animals that could travel vast distances without panic, respond calmly to subtle cues, and recover quickly after exertion. And this reliability created a quiet confidence in Mongol life. People trusted their animals, and that trust reduced fear, allowing focus to remain clear even in uncertainty. And as you rest with this image, a leader watching the horizon, judging distance not by ambition, but by what the herd can sustain, it becomes clear that this chapter of history offers a different definition of power, one rooted in maintenance rather than domination, in continuity rather than conquest. And as the mind softens, this lesson settles gently. reminding us that true authority often reveals itself not in moments of command, but in the steady, unseen labor of care that makes movement possible at all.
In this way, the Mongol relationship with horses quietly shaped not only leadership and survival, but also the inner rhythm of daily life, creating a sense of calm discipline that carried people through uncertainty without panic. Because when care becomes habitual, fear loses its grip. Each morning on the steppe began not with grand intention, but with simple checks: the state of the herd, the condition of the weakest animals, the availability of water and grass. And these small observations grounded the day in reality, preventing imagination from racing ahead of what could actually be sustained. And this grounding had a soothing effect on the mind, even in harsh conditions. Because when responsibility is clear, anxiety has less room to grow. Mongol families lived with this clarity constantly. Children learned early that tending horses was not a task separate from life. It was life itself. Brushing coats, repairing tack, leading animals gently to water. These acts taught consistency, presence, and respect for limits. And over time, this way of living cultivated emotional resilience. Hardship was expected, not dramatized. Loss was acknowledged, not exaggerated, and effort was steady rather than frantic. This emotional balance became one of the empire's quiet strengths, because people who are accustomed to caring for something fragile yet powerful, like a horse, learn how to regulate themselves. They learn when to act and when to wait, when to conserve energy and when to spend it. And this regulation extended naturally into warfare. When conflict eventually arose, Mongol warriors did not rush blindly into chaos. They moved with measured confidence, trusting the systems of care that supported them, knowing their animals were prepared, their routes planned, their limits respected. And this preparation reduced uncertainty, making even dangerous situations feel manageable. But it is important to understand that this confidence was not bravado. It was rooted in routine, in the repetition of care carried out long before any battle began. And this is why Mongol military success cannot be separated from horse care. Because without healthy, trusted animals, strategy collapses, speed falters, and coordination breaks down. And the Mongols understood this instinctively, never romanticizing neglect as toughness, never confusing endurance with abuse. Instead, they recognized that true endurance is protected, maintained, and renewed through rest, nourishment, and attention. And this philosophy extended into moments of pause as well. Camps were not always scenes of urgency. There were long periods of waiting, grazing, repairing, and sharing. Times when nothing dramatic happened, yet everything essential was maintained. And these pauses were not wasted time, they were investments, moments when strength was quietly rebuilt. And as you imagine these scenes, the soft sounds of horses feeding, the wind moving across open grass, the slow settling of evening, it becomes easier to see how this way of life prepared people not only for expansion, but for longevity. Empires that burn too brightly often collapse quickly, but systems built on care endure longer than their moments of conquest suggest. And as this part of the story gently unfolds, it also prepares us for what comes next, because the same principles learned through caring for horses would later be applied to caring for people, to shaping loyalty, discipline, and trust within human groups. But for now, allow yourself to rest in this quieter truth, that before the Mongols mastered movement across continents, they mastered the art of daily responsibility. And in that mastery, they discovered a form of strength that could travel far without breaking.
As this chapter gently settles, the image that remains is not one of charging armies or clashing steel, but of continuity, a line of care stretching quietly across generations, binding people, animals, and land into a single living system. Because the Mongol relationship with horses ultimately taught a truth that history often overlooks, that strength is not something seized in moments of intensity, it is something maintained through attention when nothing dramatic is happening, day after day, season after season. A horse grazing calmly at dusk carries within it countless small decisions made earlier: where to camp, when to move, how much to ask, when to stop. And these decisions accumulate into resilience, just as neglect accumulates into collapse. And this accumulation of care explains why the Mongol Empire could move so far, so fast, without fracturing immediately under its own weight. It was not driven forward by constant urgency, but carried by systems designed to renew themselves. Horses were rested, routes were adjusted, herds were protected, and people learned to align ambition with capacity, rather than forcing capacity to serve ambition. This alignment is what made Mongol power portable, able to adapt to new regions without losing its core stability. And in this sense, the steppe itself became a teacher, offering daily reminders that nothing living thrives under relentless pressure. Grass needs time to regrow, water sources need space to recover, bodies need cycles of effort and rest, and those who ignore these rhythms eventually exhaust what sustains them. The Mongols learned instead to move with rhythm, to listen, to respond, and this responsiveness became their greatest advantage. And as the mind lingers on this lesson, it becomes clear how naturally it connects to the quieter wisdom of sleep. Because sleep, like care, cannot be rushed or commanded. It arrives only when conditions are right, when the body feels supported, when tension has been allowed to release. And in this way, the story of Mongol horses speaks not only to history, but to the present moment, reminding us that endurance is built through gentleness applied consistently, not through force applied briefly. And as this chapter comes to rest, it prepares us to move forward into the next stage of our journey, where the same principles of care and responsibility will be applied not to animals, but to people themselves, shaping loyalty, discipline, and brotherhood. Yet all of that rests on what we have seen here, the understanding that empires, like bodies, survive only when their foundations are tended with patience. And as your breathing evens out and thoughts soften, allow this image to remain: a vast open land, horses moving steadily, people attentive but unhurried, a world sustained not by conquest alone, but by care repeated every day, quietly strong, quietly enduring. Before a soldier ever carried a spear, he carried silence. Long before battle tested loyalty in blood and dust, it was shaped quietly in youth, in courtyards that echoed not with shouting, but with restraint, in halls where boys learned to stand still before they learned to strike. And this is where the story of Macedonian power truly begins. Not on the battlefield, not with Alexander's campaigns, but in the slow, deliberate shaping of young lives. Because ancient Macedon understood something that many empires learned too late: that human beings, like animals, do not become reliable through force alone. They become reliable through training that blends discipline with honor. And in Macedon, this training began early. Boys of noble families were sent to serve as royal pages, not as servants in the modern sense, but as apprentices to power itself. They lived close to the king, observed him daily, attended rituals, hunts, and councils, and in doing so, absorbed the rhythms of authority long before they were asked to wield it. Silence was their first lesson, learning when not to speak, when to listen, when to wait, because silence created awareness, and awareness created judgment, qualities far more valuable than strength alone. And as these boys grew, they were not isolated as individuals. They were bound together, trained side by side, corrected together, rewarded together. And this collective formation mattered deeply, because Macedon did not seek to create obedient individuals. It sought to create networks of trust, young men who knew each other's habits, strengths, and limits, who shared memories long before they shared battles. And from this system emerged the Hetairoi, the companions, not merely elite cavalry, but a brotherhood forged through years of proximity and shared discipline. Loyalty here was not abstract, it was personal, built on daily interactions, mutual dependence, and a shared sense of honor. And this is why Macedonian power did not rest solely on the figure of the king, even one as remarkable as Alexander. It rested on a web of relationships, each strand strengthened through education, ritual, and expectation. And as you let this scene form in the mind, stone courtyards at dawn, young figures standing quietly, waiting, listening, you may notice how calm this beginning feels, how far removed it is from the chaos we usually associate with conquest. Because before Macedon mastered war, it mastered formation, shaping human character the same way earlier societies shaped relationships with animals, through repetition, proximity, and care. And as the rhythm of this story settles, it becomes clear that what was being domesticated here was not land or beasts, but human potential itself, guided patiently toward loyalty that would endure beyond fear or reward.
As these young pages moved through their days, the education they received was never presented as a lesson to be memorized. It was absorbed through atmosphere, through repetition, through expectation, because Macedon believed that character was not formed by speeches, but by environments that quietly demanded consistency. Each morning began with order, not rigid, but deliberate. Bodies trained to move with control, minds trained to remain attentive even in stillness. And this balance between action and restraint became the signature of Macedonian discipline. Boys learned to ride, to hunt, to handle weapons, but always within a framework that emphasized self-command over aggression, courage without recklessness, and loyalty without blind obedience. And this mattered because Macedon was preparing not only fighters, but future leaders, men who would command others, negotiate alliances, and carry the weight of decisions far beyond themselves. Honor was not taught as an abstract virtue, it was embedded into daily conduct, how one spoke to elders, how one accepted correction, how one stood beside peers under pressure. Mistakes were not hidden, they were addressed openly, not to shame, but to reinforce accountability, because trust within the group depended on transparency. And as these boys grew into young men, their identities became inseparable from the group itself. Success was shared, failure was shared, and this shared fate created bonds stronger than fear, stronger even than ambition, because each individual knew that his standing depended not on isolated achievement, but on the reliability he demonstrated within the collective. This is how the Hetairoi emerged, not as a unit assembled for convenience, but as a brotherhood cultivated over time,
Men who had grown together, trained together, and learned the rhythms of one another's presence long before they rode into battle side by side. And this long preparation explains something often overlooked in accounts of Macedonian conquest: the remarkable cohesion of Alexander's inner circle. These men did not merely obey orders, they anticipated one another's movements, understood unspoken signals, and trusted decisions made under extreme pressure, because trust had been rehearsed for years in quieter settings, in shared meals, shared hardships, and shared discipline. And this trust transformed power itself, making it distributed rather than centralized. Alexander's authority was real, but it was amplified by the loyalty of those around him. Loyalty that did not depend on constant supervision because it had been internalized. And this internalization is the essence of human domestication in this context, the shaping of behavior not through force, but through identity. People acted in alignment with expectations because those expectations had become part of who they were. And as you imagine these young men standing together at dusk, the training yard quiet, the day's lessons complete, you may sense how calm this process feels, how unhurried, because Macedon was in no rush to produce results. It invested years into formation, trusting that patience would yield durability, and that durability would outlast any single campaign. And this patience would later allow Macedonian forces to operate far from home without fragmenting, because the glue that held them together was not geography, but shared upbringing. And as the mind rests on this idea, it becomes easier to see how power, in its most enduring form, is never improvised. It is cultivated slowly through environments that reward steadiness, clarity, and mutual respect. Qualities that settle gently into the listener as the story continues, inviting reflection rather than excitement, and preparing the way for the deeper rituals of belonging that will soon follow.
As the years passed and these young men moved closer to adulthood, the training they received began to shift almost imperceptibly from instruction to expectation. Because Macedon understood that true discipline reveals itself not when someone is being watched, but when no one is giving orders at all, the royal pages were gradually trusted with greater responsibility. Small decisions at first, managing tasks during hunts, coordinating movements during ceremonies, maintaining composure in moments of uncertainty. And these moments mattered far more than formal drills because they tested internal alignment rather than external obedience. A young man learned not simply what to do, but who he was expected to be. And this identity-based formation was the quiet engine of Macedonian power. For when identity is shaped correctly, behavior follows without force. And this approach required patience, because identity cannot be rushed. It forms through repetition, through consistent feedback, through the steady presence of peers who reflect the same standards. And this is where the brotherhood deepened. Friendships formed not around pleasure or convenience, but around shared restraint, shared effort, and shared accountability. The men who would later ride as Hetairoi learned to rely on one another long before they relied on strategy. They trusted one another's judgment, not because it was perfect, but because it had been shaped within the same framework, the same code of honor. And this shared code acted like an invisible language, allowing coordination without constant instruction. And when these men eventually stood beside Alexander in moments of crisis, the calm they displayed was not accidental, it was practiced, rehearsed in years of disciplined youth. And this calm spread outward, stabilizing those around them, creating pockets of order even in chaos. And this effect reveals the deeper meaning of human domestication within Macedon, because what was being shaped was not submission, but reliability, the ability to remain aligned with the group's values under pressure, to choose honor over impulse, duty over fear. And this choice, repeated countless times in small ways, created men who could be trusted with power. And power shared among the trustworthy multiplies rather than fractures. This is why Macedonian authority functioned as a network rather than a single pillar. Loyalty flowed horizontally as much as vertically, binding companions to one another as strongly as to the king. And this horizontal trust reduced the burden on leadership, because decisions did not need to be enforced constantly, they were carried forward willingly. And as you imagine these young men walking together at night, the training grounds quiet, the city resting, you may feel how gentle this process truly was, how far removed from brutality. Because the shaping of human character, when done correctly, does not require cruelty. It requires consistency, clarity, and time. And Macedon invested all three generously, trusting that what emerged would endure beyond any one ruler. And this trust was rewarded, for even after Alexander's death, the bonds forged in youth continued to influence the actions of his companions, shaping kingdoms and conflicts long after the original center of power was gone. And as the mind rests on this unfolding, it becomes clear that the domestication of humans in this sense was not about control, but about creating environments where the best parts of human nature could be relied upon, even in darkness, even in uncertainty. And as your breathing slows and thoughts soften, allow this quiet image to settle. Young men bound not by fear, but by shared formation, standing ready not because they are ordered to, but because they know who they are together.
As this system matured, something quietly remarkable happened within Macedonian society. Power began to feel less like something imposed from above and more like something circulating through trusted relationships. Because when young men are shaped together over many years, authority no longer needs to announce itself loudly. It is recognized instinctively. The royal pages did not simply learn to obey the king, they learned to read one another, to sense hesitation, confidence, fatigue, resolve. And this sensitivity became the true currency of leadership. A commander who understood the state of his companions could act decisively without explanation, and those companions would respond without hesitation, not out of fear, but out of alignment. And this alignment created a form of unity that outsiders often misunderstood, mistaking it for blind loyalty, when in truth it was something far more complex, a loyalty built on shared formation, shared memory, and shared responsibility. And this explains why Macedonian forces could endure long campaigns far from home without dissolving into rivalry or disorder. The bonds that held them together were not dependent on constant reward or punishment. They were sustained by identity, by the sense that each man carried not only his own honor, but the honor of those who had grown beside him. And this sense of mutual accountability softened aggression within the group. Disagreements were inevitable, but they were contained by respect, because to break trust with a companion was to weaken the whole, and weakness was something no one could afford. And in this way, Macedonian training achieved what many later systems failed to do. It balanced ambition with cohesion, allowing individual excellence to flourish without undermining collective stability. And this balance was reinforced through ritualized routines, shared meals, shared drills, shared moments of waiting, where nothing urgent happened, yet everything essential was maintained. These quiet intervals were as important as moments of action because they reinforced belonging, reminding each man that he was part of something larger than himself. And as you imagine these evenings, companions sitting together in low light, speaking little, resting after the day's demands, you may notice how calm this image feels, how different it is from popular depictions of ancient warriors,
because Macedonian strength was not fueled by constant intensity, it was sustained by measured calm, by the confidence that came from preparation and trust. And this calm allowed them to face uncertainty without panic, to adapt when plans changed, to hold formation even when outcomes were unclear. And this adaptability became one of their greatest advantages, because rigid systems break under pressure, but flexible networks endure. And the Hetairoi were precisely that, a flexible network of individuals bound by shared values, capable of acting independently while remaining aligned. And as this understanding settles in the mind, it becomes clear that the true innovation of Macedonian power lay not in tactics alone, but in the human architecture that supported them, an architecture built patiently, quietly, over years of shared experience. And as your breathing deepens and thoughts slow, allow this image to linger, a circle of companions bound not by fear or command, but by trust earned through time, a reminder that the most enduring forms of power are those that feel almost invisible, because they are carried willingly together.
As this chapter gently draws to a close, what remains is not the image of a king standing alone at the center of power, but of a quiet formation that existed long before any crown felt heavy. A formation built from patience, proximity, and shared becoming. Because the true achievement of Macedon was not simply that it produced extraordinary commanders, but that it produced men who could be trusted with one another. And that trust, once established, outlived any single campaign, any single ruler, even any single lifetime. The royal pages who grew into Hetairoi carried with them an internal compass, calibrated through years of shared discipline, teaching them how to remain steady when noise surrounded them, how to choose restraint when impulse tempted them, and how to place the good of the group above the instinct to stand alone. And this internal compass is what allowed Macedon power to feel almost effortless at its height, because effort had already been spent earlier, in youth, in silence, in repetition, when no one was watching. And this is why the story of the Hetairoi belongs naturally within the larger theme of domestication that runs through this entire journey. Cats taught humans the power of creating conditions rather than enforcing control. Horses taught humans the responsibility of daily care. And here, in Macedon, humans learned how to shape one another not through domination, but through shared formation, through environments where honor was expected, discipline was normalized, and loyalty grew organically. And as you reflect on this, you may notice how calming this realization feels, because it suggests that stability does not require constant tension, that order does not require constant force, that the deepest forms of power are those that allow people to relax into their roles, knowing what is expected, knowing who stands beside them, and knowing that they are not alone in carrying the weight. And this sense of shared weight is deeply human. It mirrors the way communities form, families endure, and even how sleep itself arrives, not through command, but through safety, familiarity, and trust. And as your breathing becomes slower and more even, this story settles naturally into rest, because it speaks to something older than war, older than empire, the need to belong to a structure that holds without crushing, that guides without shouting, and that prepares individuals not for constant struggle, but for long continuity. And as this chapter fades, it gently prepares the way for what comes next, the rituals that solidified these bonds, the shared meals, the banquets, the moments where brotherhood was not trained but affirmed. But for now, allow this image to remain.
young lives shaped quietly into reliable strength, standing together not because they must, but because they have learned over many years how to be strong together. And with that calm understanding, let the mind drift, knowing that the most enduring forms of power are the ones that allow us at last to rest.
Some battles were never fought with weapons. They were fought at the table, with wine poured slowly, with glances exchanged in silence, with memories shared and repeated until they became truth. And in ancient Macedon, these banquets were not moments of excess alone. They were moments of decision, because when swords were set aside and armor removed, what remained was something far more revealing. Who sat beside whom? Who was invited to speak? Who was trusted enough to listen? And these details mattered more than any formal decree, for Macedonians understood that power does not endure through force alone. It endures through ritual, through repeated gatherings that transform individuals into a single body. The banquet hall became a space where hierarchy softened without disappearing, where the king reclined among companions, not to diminish authority, but to anchor it in shared experience. Wine flowed not simply to intoxicate, but to loosen the boundaries of speech just enough to reveal character. Because a man's true nature often surfaced not in battle, but in leisure. How he handled excess, how he spoke when guards were lowered, how he remembered the past. And these evenings served as subtle tests of belonging. Those who understood the rhythm of the banquet, when to speak, when to remain silent, when to honor memory, and when to let it rest, demonstrated a deeper alignment with the group than any oath spoken aloud. And through repetition, these rituals transformed trust into something tangible, something felt in the body, not merely believed in the mind. Sharing food and drink created a sense of mutual vulnerability, because to eat together is to acknowledge dependence on the host, on the supply, on the safety of the space. And this vulnerability was precisely what strengthened bonds. For when men allowed themselves to be unguarded together, loyalty deepened beyond fear. And this is why Macedonian banquets were inseparable from political life. Alliances were reinforced not through contracts alone, but through presence, through being seen and remembered at the table. And as you imagine the low light of oil lamps, the murmur of voices, the measured pace of the evening, notice how calm this form of power feels, how different from conquest. Because here, influence is not seized, it is cultivated. And as this chapter opens, it invites us to rest in the understanding that before empires fracture on the battlefield, they fracture first when rituals fade, when shared spaces disappear, and when no table remains where memory can be renewed.
As these banquets repeated across seasons and years, they became more than social gatherings. They became the memory engine of Macedonian power, because what was remembered together was what bound people together. Stories told at the table were not casual entertainment. They were carefully chosen echoes of shared hardship. Victories survived, losses endured, names of those absent spoken aloud so they would not fade. And in this way, memory itself became a form of discipline, shaping how companions understood their place within the whole. A man who heard the same stories year after year learned not only what had happened, but what mattered, which actions were honored, which failures were forgiven, and which lines must never be crossed. And this collective memory created continuity across generations. Young companions learned who they were by listening before they ever spoke, absorbing the emotional map of their community, understanding where loyalty had been tested and proven. And this process was deeply stabilizing
because it anchored identity in something larger than the self. The banquet table thus functioned as a quiet classroom, one without lectures, where lessons were transmitted through tone, pause, and repetition. And the presence of the king at these gatherings reinforced this shared center, not as a distant authority, but as a participant in memory, someone who listened as much as he spoke, signaling that power too was bound by tradition and expectation. And this shared remembrance softened rivalries, because when men remembered together, they were less likely to fracture apart. Disagreements still existed, but they were held within a framework of common story, common fate, and common future. And this is why exclusion from the banquet mattered so deeply. To be absent from the table was to be absent from memory, and absence from memory was the first step toward political isolation. Because power in Macedon was not simply about command, it was about belonging, and belonging was renewed through ritual presence. And as you imagine these evenings continuing late into the night, voices slowing, wine warming, silence stretching comfortably between words, notice how natural this rhythm feels, how similar it is to the way the mind settles before sleep when thoughts drift gently rather than collide. Because these rituals were designed not to excite, but to soothe, to regulate emotion, to bring the group back into alignment after the strain of action. And this regulation was essential, for without it, ambition would turn inward, eroding trust. And when rituals failed or were neglected, Macedonian history shows us what followed: fragmentation, suspicion, sudden violence among former companions, proof that power without ritual quickly decays. And as this realization settles, it becomes clear that the banquet was not a luxury added to power, it was the structure that held power together, quietly, persistently, night after night.
Over time, these rituals of the table did something even more subtle. They synchronized emotion, aligning how companions felt as much as how they thought. Because shared meals regulate the nervous system of a group, just as breathing regulates the body. Tension dissipates when people eat together. Suspicion softens when wine is poured by familiar hands. And silence becomes safe when it is shared rather than imposed. And in Macedon, this emotional synchronization was essential, because men who marched and fought together carried enormous strain, fear, ambition, grief. And without structured release, those forces would eventually turn inward, fracturing unity. The banquet provided that release in a controlled, meaningful form. Not chaos, but rhythm. Not indulgence without boundary, but indulgence framed by tradition. There were expected gestures, expected toasts, expected moments of restraint. And these expectations acted like rails, guiding emotion so it could flow without overwhelming the group. Laughter was permitted, even encouraged, but ridicule was watched carefully. Anger could surface, but not linger. Grief could be acknowledged, but not allowed to isolate. And through this careful modulation, the Macedonians achieved something rare. They allowed strong emotion without allowing emotional chaos. And this ability to feel together without falling apart together was one of the quiet foundations of their resilience. And the king's role in these rituals was crucial, not as a distant figure above emotion, but as a participant who modeled restraint, memory, and continuity. When the king remembered fallen companions aloud, he signaled that loss was shared. When he accepted correction or laughter, he signaled that power was secure enough to be human. And this security flowed downward, stabilizing those around him, creating an environment where loyalty felt natural rather than coerced. And this is why Macedonian banquets were not interchangeable events. Each one carried weight. Each one reaffirmed who belonged, who was trusted, and who shared responsibility for the future.
And when companions reclined together night after night, they were not merely relaxing, they were rehearsing cohesion, practicing the emotional alignment that would later allow them to act decisively under pressure. And this rehearsal mattered because battle compresses time, forcing rapid decisions, and only groups that have already aligned emotionally can move together without confusion. And as you imagine these scenes, the soft clink of cups, the warmth spreading slowly, the pause before someone speaks, you may feel how naturally this atmosphere invites rest, because it mirrors the conditions required for sleep: safety, familiarity, and shared presence. And in this way, the rituals of Macedonian banquets echo the deeper rhythms of human well-being, reminding us that before we can act well together, we must first rest together, regulate together, remember together. And when those rituals weaken, when meals become hurried, when memory is no longer shared, when silence becomes uncomfortable rather than calming, power begins to unravel. Because without emotional alignment, strategy becomes brittle, loyalty becomes conditional, and authority becomes loud to compensate for what it has lost. And as this understanding settles gently into the mind, it becomes clear that the banquet was not simply a social tradition, it was a technology of cohesion, refined over generations, quietly sustaining one of history's most formidable networks of loyalty, not through force, but through feeling, repeated night after night until it became second nature.
And so, as this final chapter settles into silence, the true shape of Macedonian power becomes clear, not as a structure of stone or steel, but as a pattern of return. Return to the table, return to memory, return to one another. Because long after weapons are set down, it is rituals that decide who remains, who drifts away, and who fractures into rivals. The Macedonians understood this deeply, perhaps more deeply than they ever put into words, that victory achieved without ritual dissolves quickly, while power renewed through shared presence endures. And this is why, when campaigns ended and camps dissolved, the banquet hall did not disappear. It waited, ready to gather companions again, to reweave bonds loosened by distance and strain, to remind each man not only of what he had done, but of who he was in relation to others. And this reminder was essential, because identity forged only in battle is brittle. It shatters when fighting stops. But identity reinforced in ritual survives peace as well as war. And in these final images, companions recline together, no urgency pressing, voices low, laughter sparse but genuine, memory flowing gently like wine, not flooding, not withheld. And in this space, hierarchy relaxes just enough to breathe, allowing trust to renew itself without threat, without spectacle. And this renewal is the quiet conclusion of the entire journey we have followed, from cats who chose to stay without being owned, to horses cared for daily without domination, to young men shaped patiently into networks of loyalty, and finally to rituals that held those networks together when action ceased, all of it pointing toward the same ancient insight, that the most enduring forms of power are not forced, they are invited, maintained, and returned to again and again. And as your breathing slows and the mind drifts closer to rest, allow this final understanding to settle gently, because it speaks not only to history, but to something deeply human, the need for rhythm, belonging, and shared quiet. And just as these rituals once gathered warriors into brotherhood, they now gather our thoughts into stillness, preparing the mind to let go, to rest, to to trust that what truly holds us does not need to shout. And with that calm certainty, the story completes its circle, leaving us not with noise, but with continuity, not with conquest, but with connection. And as sleep approaches, remember, long after battles fade, it is the rituals of care, memory, and togetherness that decide what endures.